Welcome back. President Trump's orders and actions won't face much pushback from Congress. We've seen Republican lawmakers, one after another, come on this program saying they back Trump and will largely defer to him on process, priorities, and politics.
President Trump's policies must be delivered.
I'm looking forward to supporting, again, President Trump's initiatives across the board. But
we want to remind the president that we want his agenda done as much as he does. We love everything that Trump campaigned on, all of his mission is our mission as well.
If you're not going to play ball and you're not going to be a part of the team, then you shouldn't be on the team at all. And so, yes, I'm telling you right here, right now, that if there's a senator in the Republican Party who wants to shoot down nominations that President Trump has put forward that he thinks can get his agenda to where it needs to be, then they shouldn't be in the Senate any longer.
Good gravy. Buckle up, because Donald J. Trump is just getting started.
It's a love parade in the House, and while we insist on the immediate confirmations of Kash Patel at FBI, Tulsi Gabbard as the Director of National Intelligence, and RFK Jr. at Health and Human Services, confirmations largely have gone pretty well in the Senate. President Trump has shown full and complete command of the executive branch. The legislative branch is clearly goal-aligned, so that only leaves one branch of government as an obstacle: the courts. To understand the impact federal courts can have on public policy, you first have to understand the absurdity of nationwide injunctions by a single Article III judge in one jurisdiction. President Trump can issue nationwide executive orders, he's the president of the whole country, and then just one federal judge in one jurisdiction can block that action everywhere. This is absurd, as former House Judiciary Committee Chairman Bob Goodlatte observed all the way back on November 30th of 2017.
If one federal district court judge invalidates a federal policy and issues a national injunction, the injunction stops the federal policy with respect to everyone nationwide. To paraphrase what one law professor has written, shop till the federal policy drops.
That committee, which I served on at the time, passed the Injunctive Authority Clarification Act of 2018, but it never became law. That's probably good legislation to revisit. Right now, many of President Trump's most impactful executive orders are subject to one judge in some deep blue jurisdiction blocking enforcement nationwide. This is the current choke point for the administration's success or failure. Listen to the executive orders currently blocked: ending birthright citizenship, the federal employee buyout, freezes on certain wasteful grants and loans, sending detained Venezuelan migrants to Gitmo despite alleged ties to Tren de Aragua, and even the order regarding men pretending to be women in women's prisons. Guess where these orders that stopped those policies were issued? Massachusetts, D.C., Rhode Island, New York, New Hampshire, New Mexico, and Maryland. The most liberal elites in robes in deep blue states, mostly appointed by Biden, are now in control of the Trump agenda. It's anti-democratic for the rest of us. Vice President J.D. Vance had a brilliant take on this conflict. Quote, "If a judge tried to tell a general how to conduct a military operation, that would be illegal. If a judge tried to command the attorney general how to use her discretion as a prosecutor, that's also illegal. Judges aren't allowed to control the executive's legitimate power." Fortunately, there is a check on the power of these judges and their effort to have these nationwide injunctions. Elon Musk implicitly called for the impeachment of Judge Paul Engelmeyer, who limited Doge's access to Treasury data through one of these injunctions. So impeachment is the constitutional check. Judge Engelmeyer was appointed to the bench by President Obama. No surprise, but you voted for Trump, not Judge Engelmeyer. Judicial impeachment must originate in the House Judiciary Committee. I know its chairman well, Jim Jordan, and I wouldn't be surprised if impeachment articles were being considered right now. Here to discuss exactly how that process would work is my next guest, senior counselor at the Article III Project and syndicated columnist Josh Hammer. He's also a host of The Josh Hammer Show. Josh, how come the House of Representatives doesn't impeach more judges?
You know, Matt, I've been saying this actually for years. I'm one of the rare people who has literally been calling for this basically since I was in law school. In fact, in my estimation, the impeachment power, generally speaking, is one of the most underused, underutilized tools in the entirety of Congress's arsenal when it comes to presidents and when it comes to judges alike. I couldn't even tell you the last time that there's been a successful impeachment of a federal judge. I mean, maybe Salmon Chase literally in the first few years of the Republic here. But, I caught a lot of flack, actually, a couple of years ago for calling for the impeachment of Sonia Sotomayor on the United States Supreme Court. So let's just go over a little constitutional law 101. I mean, Matt, you're a lawyer, obviously, so you know this. So the impeachment criterion for the president of the United States is high crimes or misdemeanors. OK, that is basically the catch-all phrase. In Article 3 of the Constitution for federal judges, it says that judges shall sit during good behavior. But originalist scholars have shown that in good behavior has the same criteria, actually, as high crimes or misdemeanors. One thing actually means the exact same as the other. So what's good for the goose is good for the gander there. These judges are committing impeachable offenses left and right before our eyes. Alexander Hamilton, Federalist 65, defines impeachment as an abuse of the public trust. Excuse me. You're trying to bring the executive branch's agenda to a halt there? That is an absolute flagrant abuse of the public trust. That is absolutely way out of line. That is not the least dangerous branch that Hamilton wrote about in Federalist 78 there. I would love to see Jim Jordan and House Judiciary Republicans start filing articles of impeachment for all of these scoundrels in the lower courts.
And if that were to occur, what process could people expect?
Well, it would have to get out of House Judiciary Committee, and then eventually would have to get onto the floor of the House. And then it gets a little trickier in the Senate because you end up needing a higher threshold, a supermajority, to actually convict there. But, Matt, at a bare minimum, this process really ought to get started. So I'm actually big also on trying to use moments like this as a civics lesson for the American people there. The American people have probably, frankly, forgotten that Congress actually has the power to impeach a judge, because it's literally been maybe since Abe Fortas in the late 60s, early 70s. I mean, this hasn't happened literally in my lifetime. I'm only 35 years old.
Wait, hold on. I think there was one case, Josh. I got to correct you. I believe Alcee Hastings was a judge in South Florida, was impeached and removed on allegations of bribery, and then was elected to the House of Representatives, the very entity that impeached him, which, however you feel about the bribery, is a pretty boss move. I think that if you had a few articles of impeachment filed, and if you had impeachment hearings impaneled, and you had witnesses come and lay out the constitutional basis alongside some of these rulings, you could draw people into that civics lesson that you're talking about. And if you did it with just one or two or three, my suspicion is it would have a very antiseptic effect on the entire federal judiciary. One of the things that I'm concerned about are these nationwide injunctions, where President Trump is the president of the whole country. He issues an executive order for the whole country, and they go and find some blue jurisdiction in Massachusetts or Maryland. They get one judge there to issue an injunction that then rules like the law from sea to shining sea. Do you think that the abuse of jurisdiction in issuing these nationwide injunctions ought to trigger an impeachment review by the House Judiciary Committee?
Yes, and the Supreme Court also needs to weigh in on this definitively one way or the other. Clarence Thomas has been calling for this for at least 7 years, actually, since the Trump versus Hawaii case during the first Trump term. Clarence Thomas wrote a wonderful concurrence correctly saying that so-called nationwide injunctions are wildly unconstitutional, because if you go back and look at what the judicial power of which Article 3 speaks, what that meant when the Constitution was ratified in 1789, it was about Matt, it was about binding the named litigants to the lawsuit. Abraham Lincoln correctly applied this to the Dred Scott case in 1857, where he said, okay, this horrible ruling will bind Dred Scott, but I'm not going to take it a millimeter further. That is what the judgment power, the judicial power actually entails. The notion of a nationwide injunction didn't really come into being at first until the 1960s, 1970s, and then it really started picking up steam, as you know all too well, during the first Trump administration there. SCOTUS has to weigh in on this, but the House Republicans can also legislate in this arena. They can apply their own power to curtail the court's use of this highly unconstitutional remedy. So on the one hand, SCOTUS has to weigh in here, which they should ASAP, sooner rather than later. On the other hand, Congress is ripe to actually legislate in this arena. They can actually step in before SCOTUS rules by taking this tool out of their arsenal before it's too late.
I assess that if we do not resolve this question, it becomes the funnel point for the entire Trump agenda. Look, President Trump, unlike in 2017, has total control over the executive branch. You don't have all the people there trying to do harm from the inside to the same degree. And then the legislative branch has been largely compliant with what Trump has articulated that he's wanted. And yet, if you allow these people to issue nationwide injunctions, all of the possibility is going to be constrained. Are you more hopeful that in the absence of some sort of action to deal with these, that you won't flourish under these policies?
They're putting all their eggs in that basket because, as you correctly say, that's basically all they have right now. They don't control any of the branches. They don't control either of the houses of Congress, but they do control random blue state judges in states like Rhode Island, Hawaii, California, states like that there. Now, ultimately, if House Republicans do not legislate, and if such a bill that reins in nationwide injunctions, if that's not signed into law, if, God forbid, SCOTUS does not weigh in one way or the other here, then we're going to get to a fork in the road moment. And one thing that I also called for during the Trump administration, and people said that I was a tyrant, that I was crazy for saying for it, at some point, Matt, it becomes appropriate to actually pull an Abraham Lincoln, so to speak, and actually defy a court ruling as it applies to everyone other than the named parties to the lawsuit. I'm not necessarily saying that that day is today, but we are rapidly approaching that day tomorrow or the next day, again, unless Congress and or SCOTUS weighs in and says that the court's use of these extraordinary unconstitutional remedies simply cannot pass muster.
Josh Hammer, senior counselor at the Article 3 Project, host of the Josh Hammer Show. Thanks so much for joining me.
Thank you so much.